Okay, welcome to Black Men Speak. I'm your co-host, DJ Stewart.
And I'm your co-host, D. Tommy D. Duncan III, otherwise known as TD3. Jimmy, it is Wednesday night, July the 12th, 2023. And if it's Wednesday night,
It's certainly Black Men Speak, and I want to give a big shout out to Liquid for providing our theme music, and for us films in our own studio for providing our virtual studio. And if you haven't already, please hit the like button. Please subscribe to our channel and invite a friend so you guys will have something very interesting to talk about the rest of this week. With that being said, Tom, I know we have a full docket, so let's get started.
yes, we do, folks, have a lot to talk about tonight. So we do have two of our returning special guests in the field of psychology and health who are going to talk about mental health and the climbing rates of depression and suicide within youth in America. And we're going to deep dive on that. What does that look like? What do you need to know if you have young people in your life? How do we put our arms around this and contribute to better overall health in our communities? But prior to that, we have a couple of articles or a couple of news items that we'd like to talk for a few minutes about. For those of you who may not have been reading the paper, you have something to talk about for the rest of the week. First, we're going to talk about the mayor of South Fulton County in the Atlanta metro area who got arrested a little bit earlier, and talk about some of the drama that's been going on there. Something very interesting that my good colleagues here brought up regarding the first trans woman to win the Miss Netherlands pageant, who is going to be competing in the Miss Universe pageant later, and what the implications are there. And I'm very interested to see what that conversation looks like. And then something a little bit more closer to home. Texas A&M University, the largest state public institution by population in the United States, just offered and rescinded an offer to one of their former alumni to head up their journalism department. Kind of interesting news, makes you scratch your head. As someone used to say, one of those things that make you go, So we're going to go ahead and get started, Jimmy. We'll start off first with our story about the South Fulton mayor and let it rip.
Tom, I can't imagine that any mayor, city mayor, would be arrested and handcuffed over a trespassing charge. I mean, it seemed like it was a misunderstanding. This was, I believe, a piece of property the city was maybe looking to acquire, either through a purchase or maybe even through eminent domain. And I'm not sure why the mayor decided to go take a look and poke around, but he was basically just checking the property out. And I believe the property owner was there on the property, held him at gunpoint, called the police, had him arrested. Tom, not only for trespassing, but for attempted burglary. And like I said, I'm not a lawyer, but I did go to law school, and it seemed like burglary has an element of intent. A person who's looking around, generally, unless they are grabbing your TV and walking out the door, it's going to be very difficult to prove an intent. But on top of that, Tom, the chief of police is appointed by the mayor. And to imagine, I just can't imagine that a mayor would be arrested in those circumstances. So what's going on in South Fulton, for the mayor, the city council, and the police department to be at odds with each other?
I'm not going to speculate on why the mayor of South Fulton would be arrested on trespassing charges at this lakefront.
And burglary.
And look, now I'm trying to figure out what did he have in his hand that belonged.
Nothing. He was just looking. So, and then the person came out with a gun and held him at gunpoint. So I'm not sure how the burglary charge got included, but he was certainly handcuffed, and I think had to post $11,000 bail to get out of jail.
I mean, if it's trespassing, it's trespassing, but to get handcuffed and arrested, charges including burglary. And I've not seen any research that shows what he took, what he stole, what seems to be the issue with the burglary charges. The only thing I can consider is, happens to be black male in America, and he happens to be mayor. I just have a hard time believing that if it weren't those unique circumstances, that he would have been arrested, that he would have had literally a gun at his head saying, you know what, don't move or I'm going to shoot. That's what the guy said.
Right. And so it's, I mean, I know you have property rights, and you have the right to defend your property, but you and your property were not under attack in that situation. So there was no imminent threat of harm to you or to your property for you to use deadly force. So I'm surprised it's not being investigated a little bit more. But on top of that, Tom, the law enforcement officers could have simply written the mayor a citation. If they wanted to file more serious charges, they certainly could have filed the charges and just have him appear. It's not like he's a flight risk. He's not going to run or go anywhere. Hell, he works in City Hall. You know exactly where to go find him if you decide that charges need to be filed. So, like I said, the whole thing seemed bizarre. And I know that he's been at odds with the city council,
Yep.
and he may be at odds with the police force there also. So, it seems like delicate situation, and maybe one of our experts that we have on can maybe help with the situation because it sounds like there's some mental illness being they're suffering from some kind of mental illness in that city.
Well, I think what South Fulton is suffering from is problematic with what the large part of America is suffering from, and that is something that I will go back to Public Enemy. They had a track, Fear of a Black Planet.
Okay, we slightly differ on that opinion, but let's go on to our next story, Tom.
Okay, so I'd like to get your opinion on this. This is the first trans woman to win the Miss Netherlands pageant that will be competing in the Miss Universe pageant
Right.
in San Salvador. And so I know she's not the first to compete, the first trans to compete in the Miss Universe pageant. That was Miss Spain in 2000. Well, I guess whatever you would call them, Spain, the representative from Spain in 2018. So this would be the second, but there seems to be a little bit more hullabaloo about this.
Well, Tom, you know what? Here's my problem: is that when I look around the landscape, it seems to be only conservatives such as myself that are speaking out against this. Now I've said I'm on record. I do not care who you love, who you marry, or who loves you. That's your own personal business. But it seems to me that the rights of women are being eroded. When I look at the high school level and young boys who can't compete against other boys, decide that they want to compete against the girls and be a girl, have access to changing rooms and bathrooms and shower rooms with girls at the high school level and at the collegiate level. And then you look at even the professional level in golf and the Australia Open, in cycling, powerlifting, track and field. More and more men are starting to enter these arenas that were carved out in an exclusive domain for women. And the problem I have, Tom, is where are the feminists to complain about this? Somehow I don't see any protest from the pussy hats wearers or the vagina uniforms. I don't see the feminists, the Me Too's, or any of these other feminist organizations saying anything against this. Now, surely I'm not the only person who thinks this is wrong. There should be some areas that women have fought for that should be the exclusive domain for women. And even college students who write papers and use the term real women or natural women or biological women are having their papers failed because they use the term, and somehow, you know, the a woman becoming the sportswoman of the year for ESPN and the ESPY, Time Woman of the Year. I mean, what was the point of the whole liberation movement if now men are just going to take over the exclusive domain that was normally reserved for women? The Universe pageant, Tom. I mean, come on. At what point do we draw the line and say enough is enough? And like I said, I'm very disappointed that the feminists. I haven't heard one feminist speak out against this. And we have two experts in mental health and on the show. Last time I checked, gender dysphoria was still a mental health issue. It's not something that we don't condone and feed into schizophrenia or any other mental health. So why do we single this one out and somehow try to normalize? This is not normal. When you feel that you're in the wrong body or the wrong sex, that is a problem. that you can't accept what God gave you and you feel that you're in the wrong body, that's a mental problem that needs to be addressed, not for the rest of us to go along with this and try to normalize it.
Well, Jimmy, actually, the Miss Universe has been accepting or allowing trans applicants for about a decade. And I know that the Netherlands, never been there personally, but I know that it's probably one of the more liberal countries
It is.
on the globe. And so, I mean, if that's their choice to select someone of that nature to be their representative, I guess that's their call. One thing that I also found that was pretty interesting is that a transgender business tycoon from Thailand actually owns the Miss Universe organization, which
Oh,
runs Miss
okay.
Universe pageant.
I guess
So,
Trump must have sold it because I know at one point he owned it.
yeah. Well, no, they had to get him. He was probably doing something he shouldn't have done. But anyway, yeah, it's actually a trans business tycoon from Thailand who owns the Miss Universe organization right now. But they've been accepting transgender applicants for over a decade now. And so I guess the question is, when it comes to feminists, what's at risk?
Well, Tom, like I said, it's going to be a steady erosion, a slow erosion of areas that were carved out for women rights that's at stake here. And if the feminists who are supposed to be defenders of women's rights won't speak up, won't say anything, won't protest, then I guess at some point I just simply need to, as a conservative male, need to just accept that this is what women want.
Well, I mean, I guess if they identify as a woman, they were a naturally born male, but they identify as a woman, and maybe it's that they're respecting their rights as they identify as a woman, and that's part of their feminist mantra.
Well, Tom, you know what? I identify as supreme intelligence of the universe, but that
Mhm.
doesn't mean that everyone has to accept me for being the supreme, the head honcho, and the smartest person in the universe. So how we self-identify doesn't really matter. Not to me, it doesn't. You don't get to name your own pronouns. I don't get to name my own adjectives. You're not limited to whatever adjectives I decide that society should use when it's applicable to me. So we have a language for a reason. That language has rules. And once again, to me, this is just an attempt to normalize a mental illness. And so rather than normalize it, we should be looking for ways to treat these people so they can deal with it. Once they become adults, do what you want to do.
I
You
think
know,
that there are a lot of women maybe cussing under their breath about this, and maybe they don't want to get too loud about this because they figure they may be stepping on their own feet to some degree, or maybe they feel that they have bigger fish to fry for this topic, which is still pretty early on to be on some of the major platforms. But I think that there will definitely be some more folks speaking out about it, so to speak. We've talked about it. We see it in sports. We've talked about the controversy in the schools where someone who identifies hasn't gone through the process, who is trying to identify or become a girl, going to the girls' restroom, even though they were naturally born as a girl. So this gets to be a very slippery slope.
and we have several cases, Tom, where these boys and men, like even in the prison system, they're placing men in the women's prisons simply because they identify as a woman, and then the incidents of rape and pregnancy have shot up in women's prison as a
Yeah.
result. You
Well,
know,
Jimmy,
go
go
ahead.
ahead, Jimmy.
I was
Um,
just going to say, and also in the high schools, you have young girls who are being assaulted by young boys because now boys can have access to the women's bathrooms and showers and changing facilities. And at some point, Tom, I mean, there's a reason why we have a division with sports and some other areas with between men and women. Men and women physically are not equal. I don't care how much the feminists want to believe that there's equality there. There isn't. Men are much stronger and faster than women, and they have an unfair advantage when physically competing against each other. For that reason, we need to keep things in their proper context because we can appreciate the work that women have done to accomplish the things they've accomplished when they're competing against other women. It's not fair when you're ranked number 273 in swimming, and then decide as a man, and then decide that you identify as a woman and win the women's swimming championship in college. Not just even close. I mean, you went in races by 17 seconds. Tom, that's a whole 25-meter lap in swimming. So it's just not fair, Tom. I mean, it's not right. And once again, we need to stop trying to normalize mental illness and make it right. It's just not right. Period. I don't care how many people, and I may get canceled for it. And I've already gotten a lot of hits from our friend who've attacked this show many times to cancel it. Because I'm on it and he doesn't like my views. But still, I'm going to speak out against it, Tom, because I just don't think it's right, and I'm never going to accept it. So, you guys want to cancel me or complain against me? That's fine. Um, I'm sorry, Tommy. Either give you the last word, or we can move on to A&M. Which,
In the interest of time, let's go ahead and move to the A&M, Texas A&M.
and Tom, isn't that your alma mater?
Yes, sir.
Did
Yes,
you not
sir.
have any juice there? Could you not make a phone call and let them know you're not happy with what happened?
By the time I found out, it was unfortunately the deal had already been done. But for those who may not be aware of this story, you'll definitely want to look it up. Texas A&M, in its broader efforts to become a so-called world-class institution, one of the things it's doing is trying to rebuild its journalism department, which has been defunct for, I think, close to a generation right now. And they have been recruiting the head of the Department of Journalism at the University of Texas at Austin, who of course also is a fierce competitor of Texas A&M, being the two largest university systems, not just in Texas, but in the country. So they have been recruiting Kathleen McElroy, who was leading the department at the University of Texas, for a little bit over a year to come in and revive and rebuild the journalism department that's pretty much been defunct. She has an incredible resume. PhD from the School of Journalism at the University of Texas. Went to, I think, got a master's at New York University. Is an alum of Texas A&M, class of '81. Worked for the New York Times, the Austin American Statesman. Just a pretty good laundry list of exceptional experience. And so what happens is that the university president and the chancellor of the university make an offer, 5 years, including tenure, to get her from University of Texas to Texas A&M. Anything with tenure has to be approved by the Board of Regents. That's when we got problems. Unfortunately, and I think this is a pretty embarrassing situation, does the left hand not know what the right hand is doing? Because the Board of Regents decides to come back and say, you know what, I don't know if we want to commit to this type of a deal. 5 years doesn't seem to be a long time to rebuild a program. They come back with a 1 year, I think maybe the third version by the time they get it back to us, 1 year, no tenure, at will, can fire her anytime. This is the top rated institution in the state of Texas that she's leading, one of the top rated journalism departments in the country that she's leading. And this is a debacle. It's an embarrassment. And I think that there was a better way to handle this. If you're recruiting someone like this, you're talking about a school that is the largest public state university in the country. Texas A&M is, by population, trying to be one of the top ranked institutions in the country. This isn't how you handle this. It's embarrassing. I think that, unfortunately, when you recruit a top talent like this, there's a way that you handle this. And they didn't do Jimbo Fisher like this. And I think she probably has more credibility in what she does than probably Jimbo does. And now we look at the results of what he's been doing on the football field. I would say she probably has more credibility, in my opinion. But at the same time, Jimmy, I think, unfortunately for her, as a Black female at the top of her game, working for some of the most trusted institutions in journalism in the country, that this is shameful. And I don't know that basically what has happened is she resigned from the University of Texas, signed the deal. They made it public. And this wasn't on her call. The university wanted to make a big deal out of this. Got social media coverage, a lot of positive feedback. Then all of a sudden, I guess the nameless, faceless folks in the background who influenced in Austin and at the university decided that for whatever reason she didn't fit their mold. Well, you should have figured that a long time ago before the chancellor of your system and the president of your university make an offer of this magnitude and then rescind it. So ultimately, since then, Jimmy, she has gone back to University of Texas, rescinded her resignation, and she is going to be back on staff there. I wish her the best of luck.
That's good.
There's very little to say about this, but it's very embarrassing. And for a school of this magnitude that is seeking to be a world-class institution, I think that they shot themselves in the toe. And if you're talking about being a world-class institution, you want the best and the brightest, period. Not just on your student body and in your faculty and staff. And you may come to regret this sometime in the future. So be it.
Well, Tom, I agree with you. This is despicable that this happened to her. One thing I will say that the president and the chancellor, knowing the rules that they had to get this approved by the Board of Regents, they should have made sure they had that approval in advance before they made the offer. So that's partly on them. But with that being said, once the offer was made and the kind of deal was signed and accepted, the school should go ahead and accept that and honor it. And keep their word because it is a fiasco. But Tom, this is the cancer culture that we find ourselves in. And I've never agreed with it when it happens to conservatives or actually to anyone. It doesn't matter. What you said or wrote or did 10 years ago, 20 years ago when you were younger may not be applicable to who you are right now. And if they thought she was the best at what she does as far as building a journalism department and decided to offer her a really great deal to recruit her away from a rival school, then Tom, I'm pretty sure they vetted her well and did their homework. And so this is just your school just screwed up. And the region should really, I mean, they really should go ahead and put the offer back out there and honor it and stick to it. And then if they need to chastise the president and the chancellor behind closed doors.
Oh, no, it's not the president and the chancellor, it's the Board of Regents.
Right, but I'm saying that they understood, they know the rules, Tom. They know that this deal had to be approved by the Board of Regents. Why they assumed that this was just going to be rubber stamped was wrong on their part. They should have gotten the approval from the board first and then made the offer. Is my point. Is that I mean they're not new at this. They understand what the process is. So they have some dirt on their hands also with this.
Well, all I can say is this: for a university that's trying to be a top-ranked institution globally, this is some goober stuff.
Tom, this is yes, it very much is. So and I hope your school does much better in the future. And like I said, really, they should be forced to either honor the deal or pay out her contract. Okay, if she accepted and you made the offer, and then for whatever reason you decided you didn't want her, okay, then just like in football, just you pay out the contract when you fire coaches.
Well, thank you, brother Roberts. Aggie showed their true colors. I've known that for a very long time. I wear my Aggie ring, but not too much else. I just knew the culture there, so I wasn't particularly surprised by this. It's just unfortunate that this happened to this sister who is Aggie, who is an alum, who is at the top of her game. And it just shows that they're not committed to bringing the best and the brightest.
Well, like I said, Tom, we live in an age of cancer culture now, and that's becoming the norm. And I don't like it, period. I mean, so whether no matter who it happens to, but we need to be equally fair when it happens across the board. We need to speak out against these type of activities, no matter who it happens to.
That's true, Jimmy. And in the interest of time, we're almost halfway through.
Yes, we need to bring our guest on. We've gone a little long.
I am going to make an executive decision that we're going to probably have to extend this show for at least 15 minutes beyond our normal time, because I know the content here, we've already probably lost at least 10, 15 minutes. We're going to have to add 15 minutes to this show. I'm just letting everybody know.
That is not a problem.
I know these sisters on here now, they bring the fire. And so we're going to have to make sure that we rep them right. So we would like to introduce back and welcome Ms. McGruder and Ms. Kandra Shorter.
I'm clapping there for both of them. Very talented sisters. We're very fortunate to have you guys on.
And before we get started, let me recognize a couple of folks that we have in the chat line. We want to thank our folks for supporting us. Miss Bonnie Scott, all the way in Medellin, Colombia. Thank you for joining us. Make sure you invite plenty of the brothers and sisters of Medellin to watch our show. Miss Audrey K, what's going on, cuz, out of the Dallas area. My cousin Armanda Brown out of Irving. Good friend Asar Al-Kabilan out of Austin, Texas, in the house. Freddie Roberts, of course, from Prairie View, Texas.
The Prairie View.
And then my cousin, the counselor, Elisa Patterson, we want to thank you for joining us. So get ready. It's about to be on and popping. And let's get started. Ladies,
let's get started.
How do we do this? Tell us briefly the short version of who you are and what you do, and then we're going to get into the topic of the show. Starting with you, Carla.
Yes, good evening, everyone. My name is Carla McGruder. I am a genetic counselor, which essentially means I am a genetics expert that has experience with family history, personal history of disease, and finding the genes that contribute to that to try to prevent disease from happening, or if we know about it, treating it in a way that makes sense. My background, while I'm boarded in all genetics, my specialty is in oncology, so in cancer genetics and cardiogenetics, dealing with heart disease that's passed on in families, as well as pharmacogenomics, so looking at how medication affects or how our bodies affect how medication is passed down and how we metabolize medication. Other than that, I'm still a fan of everything, and just as a woman, a natural born woman, I'm okay.
Thank you. And the reason I'm asking you to do this, I probably couldn't spell half of what you just said, so I was like, you know what? Let me let you say this. All right, Miss Kandra, tell us about yourself.
Carla, you stole my line. I was about to use that one too. I am too a natural born woman. My name is Kandra Shorter. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I currently run my own private practice, and if you are interested, I am open to new clients, so you can find me on Psychology Today. And I also am a therapist for North Texas Area Community Health Centers, where we provide services, health services to underinsured, uninsured, and just those that are just needing services and they don't have the finances to get what we typically have access to.
Okay,
so
great work.
Folks, as you can see, we have some of the smartest people in America on a week-to-week basis, and tonight is no different than that. So let's get into it. Ladies, let's talk about mental health and start with a broader perspective, and then we're going to kind of deep dive into some more specific things in our community. So when we talk about mental health, and we talked about this before on some of our prior shows, give us a general lay person's understanding of what mental health is. And I'm curious, as we talk about that, mental health, I didn't grow up with that language in our lexicon. When we talk in our families, in our churches, in schools, we didn't talk about mental health. Either you were sick, or you were living, or you were dead. That was about it. There was not too much else. So explain this mental health stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll go ahead and start. So mental health basically is just how we think, how we feel, how we act, how we interact with others, how we feel about ourselves, how we move in the world. It can affect many different aspects of ourselves. It can affect, again, our health. It can affect a lot of our diseases are associated to mental health. It also affects how you move in relations to those, your family, your friends, co-workers. Mental health is really just, it's so broad and it encompasses so much that I don't even think people realize what it is that they're doing or saying or hearing or seeing and how it is associated to their mental health or the mental health of others.
What would you add to that, Carl?
I would add that when we think about mental health, a lot of times people think that if someone in my family has it, then that means I'm going to have it. And the reality is when you actually manifest a mental illness, that it is not at all just all genetics. There is some genetics that plays a part in that, but it is also environmental. So the things you go through really impact that. So that might be why someone may go through a divorce, have a car wreck, lose their job, and still be of sound mind, as what we say. And maybe somebody else may go through half of that and have depression or have anxiety. It is because your genes do play a part in determining if you're going to have a mental illness or not, but it is not at all fate.
So, Ms. Carla, I have a cancer question for you, mainly a study. Um, so a while back, and maybe Duke University didn't pioneer this, but this is the first time I heard it, where they infected a cancer cell with a virus and was able to get some good results. And then I heard a few more studies after that of similar people using the flu and other inactive viruses to do similar things. But then for the last few years, I haven't heard anything. And I thought this was going to be like a pioneer treatment that was going to pretty much allow us to eradicate cancer. And as a geneticist in oncology, you study these things, can you kind of tell us or bring us up to date as to where we are with these type of treatments?
Yeah, so there actually is a vaccine that is something that's been out there for a little bit that is new on the scene, and that certainly for breast cancer in particular that we can look at. So when we're looking at how cancer grows and trying to figure out ways to stop it, all the different cancers that we're thinking about, while cancer is essentially a cell that won't die and it keeps growing and replicating, that's the basic definition of cancer, it's also determining how that cancer is fed. So that's why it's a little bit different when people say a cure for cancer. We may have a better idea of how to cure one particular type of cancer, but depending on how it's being fed, these are all the different experiments that you see. So there is a vaccine that is essentially on the market. It's in the beginning phases that you should be hearing a little bit about later on this year. So there is progress when it comes to that.
Okay, that's good news.
So when we talk about, I'm just going to kind of go back to my younger days, just 2 or 3 years ago. When we were growing up, maybe mental health was, you're talking around family and they might say someone's a little touched, or they might just say when someone's crazy. So is this something that's been around for a long time, but now has been rebranded and commercialized? When we talk about mental health and the evolution of where we are with mental health today, maybe compared to the 20th century, expound on that a little bit. Has this always been around, or is this really something that emerging and evolving and they've started putting billions of dollars into it? Or is it now affecting certain folks, so now people are taking it seriously?
Mm-hmm. I would say mental health has been around. I think the difference is now there's a name for a lot of the things that people were experiencing back then. For instance, if you had an aunt who would drink a lot, we would just say maybe she was an alcoholic, but now we would kind of take a step back and, like Carla said, what had she been through? What experiences did she encounter? Is she anxious, or is she depressed, or is she bipolar, or something to that extent, which is leading her to make these behavior changes, such as drinking a lot? Is she trying to suppress memories, thoughts, whatever it may be? Maybe she socially has social anxiety and she uses alcohol to relieve some of her stress, so that when she's encountering other individuals, she's able to talk freely and something to that extent. But back in the day, we didn't have those terms, or it wasn't known to everyone to use those terms. So I think that's just what's changed. I think we just have a name to what was going on back then, and it's kind of, now that we understand through the name and have more research, we speaking more on it and can speak to it more.
From a clinical point of view, Carla, what would you say?
I definitely know that we all know there's nothing new under the sun. And so totally agree that when I'm looking at family histories and when we're trying to assess where somebody has, say, a history of mental illness and they're going to have a child and they want to know what the chance is to pass on anything, we do ask those questions. Has there been alcoholism in the family? Has there been, people will say addiction runs in my family before they say schizophrenia does, because maybe, especially in cultures like ours, people haven't had an actual diagnosis because we didn't go to someone to actually get that. So there's nothing new under the sun. And I'll just put in there, just like transgenderism, that is not new. That's been around even in African culture. This is not anything that is new. And I just want to say that I stand firmly with those sisters and brothers who identify as something else they were born with. I am privileged to be born in a body that I recognize and look in the mirror and say, I'm a woman. And my body says, yep, you're a woman. I can't imagine what it would be like to not actually go through that. So for those people in that community, while there is a higher level of having mental illness, that is only because, again, different stressors in life bring out those things where if they're under a certain stress, the stress of death, of being killed, of not having access to things because they're being turned away because they can't get work of how they identify. It is not because they themselves, identifying as a trans person, has a mental illness, but that there's constant stress put on them, similar but not the same, to as when there are Black people who have constant stress put on them, we can see an increase in disease, but not because we are inherently wrong or have the gene for that.
Okay, but isn't it still, unless things have changed, listed as a mental illness?
Things have changed.
Yeah.
Things have
They have.
changed, and so this effort to normalize this behavior. What other mental illness have we decided to just normalize and accept as a society and not treat?
It's not a mental illness.
Okay, at what point did it stop being a mental illness that was listed in the diagnostic or medical guides? I mean, what this a recent development? How do you go from being accepted as being a mental illness for years, as you said, it's been around forever, to now all of a sudden now it's not a mental illness and we're just supposed to accept it as a society?
Well, with science, you just brought up something about vaccines being the
Uh huh.
future and how things evolve. There have been several things in the DSM that have been against our community, against Black people, other things that they called mental illness that thankfully now that's not the case. Women used to be labeled as hysterical from something called hysteria, where we were actually treated with vibrators, if you want to be real, because something was wrong with us. And thank goodness that's not the case anymore. People used to have lobotomy.
I'm going to
Have
check, Carla. I mean, I believe you, but I'm going to double check. I'm going to call you on it next time you're on this show in a couple of months. And one last question on the subject, and then we can certainly move on. Is it just my perception? Maybe you guys can help me out. You ladies can help me out here. But it doesn't seem that I hear much pushback from quote unquote biological or real and natural born women on the matter. And so is this simply being accepted more readily today than maybe it would have been 20 years ago?
No, I was curious to know kind of what corners of the internet and interwebs you're on because I hear a lot of women, natural born women who push back. There are terms for them too that I won't say because I think some of them think of it as derogatory, and I don't want to do that. But there are certainly women who were born women who say that this is a encroachment, and I don't want to accept that. I don't see how my rights, the rights of my kids, the rights of anyone else are being infringed on with this as much as I do, quite frankly, with Supreme Court and other matters. So if there are other people who want to come over to this side where we get paid less than men and where we endure other, discrepancies that no one should go through, again, I am not someone who's trans, but I don't think that I have to fully understand that in order for me to say you deserve to live how you're going to live. So there is a lot of pushback. I hear it all the time. And I am very happy, JR, that you and others have a growing interest in women's sports. I'm hoping you're going to
You know, I support you women.
okay.
I'm a feminist, believe it or not,
I
even
don't
though
believe
I'm called just, although y'all fight against me. I got a question about insurance now. Um, and maybe Kendra, you can maybe answer this. Are mental health services covered under most insurance plans now? I mean, I thought maybe they were, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yes. It depends on some insurance panels depend on what type of therapy you're receiving, whether it's couples therapy, individual therapy, play therapy, art therapy, whatever it may be. It depends on that. Majority of them do accept mental health services on their insurance panels, but there are a few that are still kind of behind and don't encompass the whole of what mental health consists of.
And do you see an uptick in people using your services, for example, um, via insurance, or is there still some skepticism or hesitation by the public who somehow think seeing a therapist will sort of label them as being crazy or off?
Yeah, I tend to see more people using their insurance than not. Although there are a few out there that are willing to do self-pay. For instance, like I said, couples, families. It's kind of hard to find therapists that do couples or family therapy that accept insurance, so they typically have to pay out of pocket. I do see sometimes where those cases where you have an individual that doesn't want to link their mental health services to their insurance. For example, probably a couple of weeks ago, I had an individual that was coming to see their doctor at the clinic that I work at. And the doctor sensed that there could be some depression, possible suicidal ideation. So they asked for us to come in. Well, first asked the patient, was it okay for us to come in? Kind of talk to them, just kind of gauging where they're at. And the individual was really nervous and didn't want us to come in there. Eventually we did, just because we have to do our due diligence and just making sure that he was okay. But he opened up and said that he was wanting to join the military at some point, and he was concerned that if he were to talk to us and we put down in his records that he was depressed or had suicidal ideations or that he was going to therapy, that it would potentially affect him joining the service.
Wow. Okay.
And I don't know how true that is. I mean, I'm sure back in the day it may have been more of an effect to it, but I see, I mean, as times have changed and as we were saying, more people are
Actually, it may help you.
Yeah, as we're talking more about mental health and it's not something that is uncommon now. Maybe it's not the same as it used to be. So, but I'm not 100% sure what that looks like.
And Carla, to that point, I know we've talked about this before when you've come and talked about the type of services that you provide. And I think, or I guess maybe both of you, historically speaking, if we look at it within our community, we came to this country with mental health issues. We came to this country with massive blunt force trauma, our ancestors, because of the way that we came to this country. So we have always lived and existed with mental health issues and or with trauma. Typically, we have medicated that through the church. And that's probably through the 21st century. What kind of progress are we making in going beyond self-medicating with alcohol and drugs, self-medicating through the church to get professional help? Are we making progress? How is that looking?
I definitely think that there's progress, in particular when I'm hearing different people in the pulpit talk about therapy and talk about services. Now, I'm curious to know what Kandra thinks. I am someone, when people go for counseling or go for therapy, really want to make sure that they're with someone who's certified and not just a well-meaning church member or a part of the clergy that does not have the credentials, but maybe went through a couple of seminars. So to me, that's something that's important because, again, going back, not just with women, but with men as well. Sometimes we all know people who have used scripture to weaponize certain parts of mental health, and that's not something as well. But I hear a lot of people saying more things about, yes, pray, but then go talk to someone. Yes, go to church, but then make sure that you have that supplement of talking to someone else. Compared to when I was growing up, the past would be like, I don't have to pay anybody to be my friend. And that further stigmatized, like, well, I guess I'm not doing the right thing if I have to pay someone to talk to me so that I'm a functional person.
And Kandra, as you also address this within our community, again, we are a little bit embarrassed or ashamed to say we need help.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So Kandra, continue with that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Carla. I think there are some changes with that. And I've also even noticed that some of our big churches are either have their own counseling services within the church, or they're specifically hiring licensed therapists and counselors to be a part of those conversations, or they're having webinars or whatever it may be. And they're not just solely utilizing their knowledge on mental health or just how to maneuver in life. They're bringing in experts to speak to it. And I think that is the key to continuing to make this change, and the church understanding that, yes, they do play a pivotal role in the mental health of their congregation, but they also need the support of those that have the specific training and knowledge in regards to to mental health.
No, that's very good. Why don't we do this as we move forward? Because, and again, we adding at least 15 minutes to this show because we haven't even gotten to our youth depression rates and suicide. But before we dig deep into that, any questions or thoughts, Jimmy, on that before we start digging down into our youth?
Well, I do have one question in general. So looking at a study that suggests that Black people who live in metropolitan areas, large metropolitan areas, have the, and I'm not sure, maybe you guys can expand on how stress is measured in the body. But supposedly, Black people living in inner cities have the same stress levels as soldiers in war and war conditions. And so that, to me, that would suggest that if there's anyone that should be at the front of the line and in line to get help, it should be us. Because if we're under that kind of stress, just going to work every day, or kids going to school, just everyday life, it seems like that would put us more on edge than anyone else in other groups. So can you two ladies maybe talk a little bit more about that and maybe expand on medically how stress is measured? Because I'm just curious as to how they come to these determinations.
Yeah, I think, well, I'm going to speak to the fact of the comparison between those who live in the inner cities and those who are in combat. For instance, if you were in the inner city and you walk outside, you're not just walking out there just leisurely without paying attention to what's going on around you. You're looking over your shoulders. You're constantly just your awareness is heightened, and it's way different than somebody who may live in the suburbs and who doesn't necessarily have to have their head on a pivot. And also, you notice most people are armed. They have some form of protection in the inner city, which is similar to that when someone's in combat. If you're in combat, you can't just stroll outside and have no worries and have no concerns of what's around the corner or what's over your head. And so I think if you look at it that way, when as a Black man in general, just walking outside, and I don't even think you have to be in the inner city, just anywhere in today's society as a Black man, you are constantly at battle. So you're constantly having to put on a shield every day you walk outside. And I don't think that is a thing that most individuals encounter. So I think that in itself speaks to the comparison to that. And then what was your second part of that question as well?
How to measure that, and I can tackle that part, Kandra. So the way that we measure stress in the body, in particular, looking at you're right, JR, with the different stressors that we see, is something called ACE scores. So if you go to a doctor's appointment, they might ask you or hand you like a quick survey that asks a couple of questions. Did you grow up drinking in the household? How are you feeling today? Do you have food? Blah, blah, blah. And ACE scores are adverse childhood experiences study. And what that shows is for people who have had trauma, and that trauma, mind you, doesn't even necessarily have to be something that you experienced. It could be something that you witnessed. So I think that's getting to Kandra's point. If you don't even have to be in an urban area, you can be at A&M, right? And have some type of trauma or something else that happens. But people who have those higher ACE scores, we know that that means that there's stressors in the body where they're going to exhibit different conditions earlier, have chronic conditions. Again, it is not just what we're eating. It is not that particularly Black men are eating more pork chops than white men. No, racism and other stuff like that happens. I say that because we blame ourselves so much for things and start to say, if I would have taken care of myself better, then this would have been something where I would not have had this, or there's something inherently wrong with us. And that is not the case. And so the ACE scores, and I came prepared for this. This is someone with a high ACE score. So I've got two things here. Okay. Somebody who's regular, no high ACE score, hasn't had a lot of trauma. Someone, Black man, came up, didn't do anything too wrong, but, whatever. And so say you have those stressors that come in. You have a car wreck, you have divorce, breakup, something like that. You get illness. And when I get to the top of this means that that's when you can have mental illness or have some type of something happen. Now you've got depression. Now you've had an episode on the bus. You done freaked out. We don't know what happened. Same person can go through that same thing, right? Divorce, lose their job, illness. And they don't, when you get to the top of this, that's when we say that something's happening. So they've had the same things, but we don't see the illness. We don't see the mental illness or anything like that. It is not because of something that you did. It is not because there's something wrong necessarily with your genes. Either you were born with a little bit of genetic information that had that in there, not a whole lot, or it's everything around you, the environment that makes it where you're going to end up having this happen. We can try to measure that with ACE scores. It's just still a matter of if your medical person, your clinician is actually going to believe that.
Okay, great answer. Thank you.
All right. We have a couple of questions on the chat line. Before we do that, let me go ahead and acknowledge a couple of other folks we have on the chat line.
Oh, Tom, let's post the phone in, the dial-in number in case someone wants to call in and ask our guest a question.
That sounds good. We'd like to thank Jay Shorter for joining us on the chat line today. Brother Ed Gray, the commish, and the commish.
The commish, yes, every Saturday.
Thank you for joining us. Miss Tanya Hall, we want to thank you for joining us tonight. Miss Malika Newsom, welcome. Welcome.
Malika, okay.
Out in, is it Frisco, I think, maybe far north Dallas. Marion Square is a regular on the show. We want to thank her for coming out tonight. And I believe, let me see, who else do we have? Miss Alicia Garner. Did I get the name right on there? I want to make sure that I got that correct. Yes, Miss Alicia Garner. So we thank you for joining us tonight. We have a couple of questions that we're going to put out there. And of course, feel free to ask any questions through the chat line, or if you'd like to call in, we'll post the call-in number shortly. So the first question, Tyrone, Brother Terrence Tyrone Burton, thank you for joining us tonight. So to Miss Kandra, how can people develop a safe zone to be transparent at home?
Okay, yeah, and shout out to my husband for that question, because I believe that's him. So I think the way we can do that, I mean, it just goes back to speaking of parenting, the foundation, which we've talked about plenty times before on this show. Parents need to be, first, they need to be educated. They need to be aware of mental health in itself and what it looks like. And they need to be able to have open conversations with their children, but letting their children feel safe with having these open conversations. At the end of the day, you're going to be a parent, and there's going to be things you're going to need to address, and there's going to be consequences for things that don't align with what you have set the rules for your home, of course, and we understand you have to acknowledge that. But at the same time, if your child is coming to you and expressing something to you, don't shoot it down. Don't invalidate what they're saying. Listen to them. Try to understand where they're coming from. Give them some advice, give them some feedback, share your own experiences of what you've been through. Because a lot of times I think parents don't share what they've been through. And so children will go through something similar and they feel isolated, or they feel alone in that situation, not knowing that their family member has also experienced that same thing. So opening up to your children as well. Like I said, just providing that safe place to be able to talk, things to that extent.
Okay. And Ms. Kendra, make sure you remind your husband before the show that I said some really good things about him. So
okay, I'll let him know.
All right. Because I don't want him to think that I don't recognize him as being a good man. So from his comment from last week.
And anything that you would add to that, Carla? Creating safe spaces. I'm sorry.
Exactly that. With our kids at home, and I say that as somebody who is a newer parent with the 3 kiddos that I have, they pick up on things real quick. So it is certainly not even about what you say, but what you do. And they hear everything. And so I will say that my personal journey with going through therapy was when I had kids, and I was like, "Ooh, holy moly, I don't want to mess this up. I don't want to ruin my kids." Not, so certainly safe space is one thing like that. But also, no matter where you are, if you're in college, certainly Greek organizations and other places where like-minded people can come together, book clubs, things like that, are all other safe spaces that even if you are raising kids or around someone, letting people know that even if you don't have that safeness at home, that there are other spaces that people can go to. I grew up with an excellent mom who went to church, and that was it. My dad went to work, and that was it. So I had to really find that there are other places to have that safetyness. But certainly at home, I think mirroring kind of what you want your kid to be and just being very open. It's a hard line between letting your kids know that you're setting the role for who they want to be, and there are certain things you won't tolerate, but also keeping it open to knowing that if there is something that they're going through, they can share that with you to get help. And I did just want to say, someone asked a question. I was talking about chronic illness in general earlier. That was in the chat. And Tyrone, I think it was Burton, thank you so much for your service as a veteran.
Also, and as we go to that, and this may sound like a very generic question, so slap me if that is the case. How can someone discriminate between having balanced, if that's appropriate, mental health versus maybe you need to get some help? That can be a very broad question, I'm pretty sure. But how would you self-diagnose, or as a parent, a cousin, a friend, a colleague at work, or whatever the case, say, you know what, I had a bad day. What's the difference between having a bad day or a response to something traumatic versus maybe having some mental health issues that you really need to go get some help with?
I would say that, well, first off, every emotion has levels to it. So it can vary from high, it can vary to low, whether it's anger, sadness, anxiety, something to that extent. Those all have different levels. So I like to tell my patients that we all have a box, similar to the what Carla just used, the little square box. We all have a box, and that is kind of the normalcy part of it. So you can be sad. For instance, maybe you lost your dog. Okay, oh, you're going to be sad about losing your dog, or you had an argument with a family member. Okay, that it makes sense for you to be sad about that. So the thing is, how far does that sadness go? Are you constantly thinking about that encounter? Are you thinking about it to the point where you're not able to sleep at night? Are you thinking about it to the fact where you can't even go to work the next day? Or when you do get to work, you're not present. You can't function. You can't do just those daily tasks that you typically do. Your hygiene is decreasing. You're constantly getting into arguments with your family members or your friends. So when it gets outside of that box of normalcy and it's starting to affect your daily life, that's when it starts to shift, and that's when your sadness may have transitioned into depression. And then with depression, even in itself, there's levels to that too. So when we're diagnosing depression, you can either have mild depression, you can have moderate, you can have severe, you can have reoccurring, acute. So there's different levels to it. And I think the biggest gauge is how much is it affecting your daily life. And then it's sorry.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, and in regards to how do you notice it, or how do you speak to it if you have an individual that, or have a family member or a friend, the thing is to look for changes. As a parent, you should know your child. You should know your husband. You should know your mom, or whatever it may be. You should know how they move normally, how they respond to certain stuff. When you start noticing a little, there's a difference, and it's an extreme difference where someone who's usually very active starts to isolate themselves, or someone you knew to always dress up and have nice clothes on to start showing up and going out in t-shirts, or their hygiene has changed. You're starting to notice their hair is unkept. Or if you're noticing someone is starting to just be very sentimental and saying their goodbyes to people, and you're questioning, well, why are you telling me goodbye? I see you all the time. So the biggest thing is to first know the people around you so that you're able to be aware when things start to change, and you get that little antenna sticking up like, something's different here. And then that's where you would want to question more, and hopefully you can get down to the bottom of it and have an understanding of what they're experiencing and if they need additional help.
Gotcha. Because
Okay.
I'm hearing a couple of things. One is changes in normal patterns of behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Two is inability to function and operate whatever normal in terms of operation is for you. Are there other things that we should be looking for?
Go ahead.
Well, actually, Tom, let me ask that question because I had a multi-part
Mm-hmm.
question, I think, along those lines. Um, this is for both of you. Are there
So,
any
so Tim,
chemical
you just
markers?
interrupted my question with a multiple.
I know. I'm piggybacking on your question, so it's all going to tie in together. So I
Okay,
figured
okay.
to combine them. Um, are there any chemical markers that can be measured, like hormone levels or in the blood, that would indicate some kind of mental illness? And then more maybe towards Carla for this one, or you talked earlier about some genetic markers possibly. Are there any gene that we can look at that maybe lend more towards mental illness or suicide than then I guess I'm trying to say maybe then more so than a normal person would have. Are there chemical markers or genetic markers that would help diagnose a person's mental illness?
No. So if someone
Okay.
tries to sell you that test, that's a whole scam. There is no test that can look at one gene or even 3 or 4 genes to then tell you specifically what your risk is for mental illness. And there is no test that can look at your blood and look at certain hormone levels or markers, anything like that, that can also tell you that. Now, hormones certainly do play a part and how you manifest certain things and mood swings and things like that. Hormones are extremely important. Any woman that's going through any change in their life between puberty and everything else, men who have a lower testosterone level, right? And in their energy levels and how they work out, how muscle builds, all that stuff is impacted by hormones. That is true. But that is still not something that you can look at and go, this person has more progesterone, more estrogen, more testosterone. That means that they're going to be more, have some mental illness. That was something that was debunked in a research study that actually looked at males, particularly Black males and brown males, in a research study that was unethical years ago, who were in prison, use those juveniles to try to look at their chromosomes to say that there's a particular chromosome that showed that if you had an extra Y chromosome, then that means that you were had deviant behavior and that you were going to be somebody that had schizophrenia more often than not. That was not the case. That's been debunked.
Okay. Great answer. Thank you.
All right, let's go ahead and move forward, and I will defer on the last question. Let's move a little bit to the area that I wanted to focus a little bit more, and that's our youth. All of us at some point in time has been an adolescent young person, and one thing that I do recall in being younger and about youth today, because they don't have the amount of life experiences, the socialization, etc. Everything is very emotional. Everything is very dramatic. And, I can't imagine what the young people today go through emotionally compared to what we went through, Jimmy. We didn't have social media. We didn't have mobile devices. We didn't have the blunt force trauma that is attacking us from all angles. We had a much more controlled environment. So when we look at the numbers and what some might think to be escalating volumes of depression, anxiety, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, suicide, whether that's physical or cyberbullying, things of that nature. There's a lot of conversation to go around when it comes to our youth, whether that's a son or a daughter, whether that's a niece or a nephew, whether that's any young person that we love, have a vested interest in, or have our arms around. Let's talk about what you guys have been seeing in some of the statistics that we've been reading about in terms of, is it growing? Or is it been around and it's just being reported more often? What does that look like in terms of what we are seeing that maybe is just getting more time in mass media in terms of depression in youth, rates of suicide, and all of this unfortunate, some people call it deviant behavior?
I think, yes, there has been a change in that for the youth. I believe there was a study out that recently showed that. So previously in the past, you would have teenage boys partaking in more aggressive forms of suicide attempts. And then you would have the girls doing something lesser. But it's actually changed where young girls are actually having aggressive attempts as well. And so in that in itself has been a shift. I think there's just so much stuff that's going on currently that is speaking to this increase. As you said, Tommy, social media, I think, is probably one of the biggest things that has contributed to the increase, as well as COVID. And so when you have all that stuff combined and going on at once, and then also having a generation that we would consider to be fragile, it's not a good combination.
Yeah, there's some really great things in the chat. I agree with the mass shootings and other things. And I was just going to say that I don't think that we were meant to know about all things all the time.
Yeah.
I am supposed to know about what's happening in Dallas, and then maybe I hear from my cousins in Chicago what's going on maybe later on. Right now, we get to hear about all the traumatic things that are happening miles and countries away, and there's nothing that we can do about that. The kiddos especially hear that. They hear about climate change and hearing that they're not, I've always heard that I'm never going to have Social Security draw from by the time we get older. So it's a matter of hearing these things and not having a solution for them. On top of seeing, usually you would see people at your school and they could flex, at your school, and maybe at a homecoming, you see somebody else's, it girl at their school. And now you get to see all the it people all over Instagram all the time, where you don't feel like you measure up. And now the people in your hometown, you can't just be hometown cute anymore, a hometown football player. You're measuring up to somebody else who's a athlete that's been recruited to A&M or some other place. And now that adds a lot to how you feel as a person, and certainly that growing rate where there have been certain people in the medical field, particularly in the pediatric societies, that have said that you really need to limit social media, that people under 14 years old should not be underneath it because of this mental health crisis.
I agree.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because I know in talking to some folks, they say one of the big differences, with social media that we did not have is that since they have a mobile device, they compare their lives, their state of being, their swag, whatever it is, to people all over the world, at the speed of the internet, and they're looking at how miserable their life looks compared to all of these people on social media who are
which is not real.
Around the world, they're in front of these fancy cars doing all this great stuff, and they literally get depressed. It's like, well, I'm just little old me living over here, and so on. So my life is horrible. I just want to end. I mean, talk about that.
Yeah, and I also wanted to speak too in regards to the social media, is how the algorithm of social media plays into it as well for teenagers, or just people in general. For instance, back in the day, if you were sad, you may listen to some R&B and replay your favorite R&B song at the time that spoke to what you were experiencing. But at some point, you're going to stop playing that song and you're going to move on and turn it to something that's more upbeat. But with the thing with the algorithm, which I've noticed, and I've seen it for myself, if I look up cooking an apple pie one time on TikTok, I'm constantly getting reels about different people making apple pies. And so if you have a teenager that just happens to have a bad day, or they experience something, and maybe they didn't even have to actually search it. If they just come across a TikTok that's maybe sad, that speaks to what they're feeling, and because they watched it for a certain amount of time, or they didn't just swipe past it, the algorithm is going to think, oh, they like this stuff, so let me push more of it. Let me push more. So if you find yourself watching something or being exposed to something that's sad, and you watch it a little bit too longer, then the algorithm is going to keep pushing that stuff out. And it's a constant reminder of that sadness state and everything you see. And then it makes you think about other stuff, and it exposes you to other things that's associated to sadness. And so I think a lot of people don't even recognize how the algorithm can affect mental health and different things like that.
Yeah, I've definitely gone to the point now where when I'm talking to patients and people that I see, especially when it comes to cancer, I'll say, now that I've talked to you about cancer, if your phone and your computer is listening to you like mine is, when you log in next, your banner and everything else, see all these different cancer things. Like, I warned them at this time, because that is a lot to deal with. And I'm going to a Beyonce concert in September, and I could not tell you what I was going to wear. But now looking at everything else, the people got on shiny boots, they got on hats, they got on all kinds of stuff. And all of a sudden I'm like, wait, was I supposed to get an outfit together? And now that's all in my algorithm and everything else, where it's also feeding dopamine and everything else, and kind of being like, I got to buy this thing to make sure that I'm okay for a concert. So it's not just kids. It's not, just women or men or whatever. Everyone's kind of always getting these little hits. And somebody asked in the chat, are people naturally happy? Neurotransmitters, how your brain works, is also changed by trauma. So while people might not have gone through trauma and maybe naturally happy, it's also thinking about how your brain operates with dopamine, or the feel-good hormones and chemicals that you get from things like social media. When someone likes your post, all these things are being fed by what we're seeing, like you said, in our algorithm. That's a really good point.
A lot of the tech companies have a large number of neurologists working for them to figure this stuff out, on how to program this in the reward system to keep you coming back. I didn't believe it, but I saw some of the congressional hearings on it. I was like, wow, I didn't realize this was going on, but it is. So yeah, we got to be careful with social media, especially with kids, because they're so influenced by it, and their brains are still forming.
So we talk about our community in particular. We spend more time on television than any other group. I want to say, Jimmy, it was maybe 8 hours. We talked about this a couple of years ago. On average, I think Black America spends about an average of 8 hours a day on TV. This is like 20th century stuff.
Just on
And
TV, Tom, with 30-year life.
Asians spent maybe 1 or 2 hours. So I can pretty much guarantee when it comes to social media that we probably spend more time there too. And so if we look at the context of everything that you're talking about, that is literally rewiring our brains, creating certain types of stimuli that our young boys, our young girls, our men and women, adults are overloaded with this stuff because we spend an inordinate amount of time on this. It's probably very difficult to self-manage, to discipline. What do you say to folks out there who are bombarded with this stuff and they don't feel like they can control it, and or who have kids, nieces, nephews, grandchildren, sons and daughters, so that they can begin to reel this stuff back in? Because some of you saying, I mean, what you're saying makes absolute sense, but some people don't literally know how to control it. There are some folks who go to sleep with their smartphones at night.
Well, I'll definitely say
on their pillow.
No, you're absolutely right. That famous blue light, right? Where my husband like to at least turn down the screen so it's not so bright. I'll say first of all that the Asian, type of umbrella is real big. So we got to figure out what Asian we're talking about, and also their rate of suicide in particular Asian countries is very high because they are overworked. So just because they're not on social media does not mean that they are happier. And there are other things to account for. So I'll also say that. And I see everybody of all different races and ethnicities on the phone all the time, and all different races and ages as well. But something to kind of think about, I'll say with Black people, again, we've always been told that we're lesser than. And so we've always been marketed to, we are ones who consume all the hair care products, right? We assume all the clothes, all the shoes, because you're looking for that validation. Social media, all that gives you validation. We are also the cool kids who are on social media who are starting to trend to TikToks. We're not getting paid for it. Somebody else is copyrighting and trademarking that, but we're the ones who make it cool as well. So it really is about what's happiness for you, and anger feeds the algorithm too. So I would definitely say sometimes you have to sit back and go, after a while, am I happy? Is what I'm looking at, do I feel happier or do I feel more anxious? That type of thing. There are certain apps, yes, it's still an app, where you can put on your phone that'll say, it's been 30 minutes. It's time to put the phone down. There are certain apps themselves that will tell you, you've been on here for an hour, cool it. Now, what we're on right now and TikTok and all that is not going to do that. But there are other things that you can put in your mind to do that. And again, being around like-minded people who can hopefully get you out of that bubble to start doing other things that are actually outside. Like people say, you should go outside and touch grass.
Go outside and touch grass. Good advice.
We have a question from Brother Terrence Tyrone Burton. Do you all consider access to mental health care to be at appropriate levels for all, regardless of economic status? Let me try to reread that. Do y'all consider access to mental health to be at appropriate levels for all, regardless of economic status?
No. I can say that for a fact in regards to my job I work at. So our probably a good percentage of our population that we serve identify as Hispanic, and they speak Spanish. And so I obviously speak English. I don't have any training in speaking Spanish. And there's another therapist that works with me, and she doesn't speak Spanish either. And so, like I mentioned earlier, our clinic caters to those that are uninsured, underinsured, and undocumented. And so we're usually the only place they can come. We provide dental care, pediatric, women's health. We'll be getting a dentist. So we have the whole health in our facility. And so we're the only outlet they have to get, for a lot of them, to get their health care. But when we have a patient that comes in that speaks Spanish and they're wanting a therapist, we're having to tell them, okay, well, we have therapists. They speak English. You can use an interpreter. Would you be okay with that? And if they don't have insurance and they're undocumented, that's all they're going to have access to. So they have to either decide, okay, yes, I'm going to go through this challenge of the barrier of using an interpreter, or I'm just going to continue to deal with my mental health on my own. And so I think that that's an example in itself of those that not everyone has the same level of access to mental health. And a lot of times the population that doesn't have the equal access are the ones that need it the most.
Yeah, I will say that people have become creative. It's not the same level, but that there are options. So
Mhm.
I think back certainly to my college days where I could not afford Whole Foods, but I could afford Dollar Tree and try to
Mhm.
make my
Right.
nachos that way. It was not organic, homegrown, but I got it done. There are similarly, you might not have that one-on-one therapist that you can talk to that can offer you every single resource for you, but you have support groups, you have chat services, chat bots, you have, telemedicine in that way, where there are people who are trying to address this overwhelming mental health crisis, in particular, in like Kandra said, the groups that need it the most, that maybe you can't get off, maybe you can't get the 10 free sessions somebody mentioned in the chat that a lot of jobs are doing, but certainly there are at least more options available out there. It's just not going to be your Whole Foods. It might just be Dollar Tree at this point, and hopefully it can get you up to,
Whatever works, whatever you need to do to get some
yeah.
help if you find yourself struggling,
But
and don't be ashamed or embarrassed to seek help. There's nothing
mhm.
wrong with saying I need some help. I need to talk to someone. Doesn't mean that you're crazy or you're mentally ill. It just means that sometimes all of us need someone every now and then to talk to.
I also wanted to say real quick too, in regards to access to mental health. I think if we could speak back to social media, we could speak back to the internet. The thing is about the internet, it can has its pros and it has its cons. And one of the pros is for those that don't have access to these different services, a lot of them have access to internet. And there's a lot of YouTube videos and there's a lot of information out there that they can watch and a lot of techniques they can learn. There's workbooks or printables they can print out that they can use to go through that process of healing and understanding their mental health on their own. Although they may not have that feedback and that dialogue from somebody who would be considered an expert in it, but they do have some assistance to help them start that journey of better understanding themselves and how to improve their life and reach the goals that they have obtained have set for themselves.
Okay. Well, Tom, are there any more questions on the chat line? Because I can't see the
There
chat.
are a couple of questions here. One that I want to go back to that I missed a little bit earlier. Either of you can address this. We have a brother who had asked about, oftentimes, and this is a brother, folks been asking about depression. I'm assuming men. I know what it looks like, but sometimes need help on trying to counsel them, men in particular. Any thoughts on that? And does it look a little bit different for men than it does for women or young boys as it does for young girls?
Are you asking, does therapy look different? Can
Not,
you?
not, not the therapy, but maybe just general counsel until it's like, okay, I need to get you to a specialist. In terms of how you address the types of questions that you ask, the things that you look for in men versus women, boys versus girls.
Is the approach the same or is it
Well,
different
there we go.
based on sex?
So it's definitely different. I'll say this as somebody with 5 brothers,
Mhm.
and I won't out any of them in particular, but certain behaviors like, drinking in excess and perhaps being somebody who's out in these streets with the women sometimes are applauded instead of looked at as, hey, that's a problem. So
Mhm.
sometimes there's a lot more normalization where it can make it a little bit more difficult. And
Hmm.
maybe you have someone else in the community going, they just need to outgrow that, when in actuality, there really is a problem there. I hear a lot of the rappers, you hear it now, when they talking about smoking, you smoking all the time? You popping pills all the time? Something's up with that. And I say, as far as how to address that, it really has to come from people who look like them. It can't
Mhm.
come from me. I'm an older sister. I'm somebody's partner or something else like that. I am, I'm just, a bitter Black woman. So I can't do it like perhaps somebody from their own community would. And again, that's where I think even the men who have a little bit of bandwidth to talk with them would be the ones that they can hear that from the most, who can identify better.
So for someone who is not a counselor, a trained psychologist, what are some of the general things that they can do in talking to their brother, their father, their homeboy, their work colleague, or someone of that nature, without overstepping their boundaries in terms of expertise, but trying to get it out and then creating what someone asked earlier, a safe environment so someone would actually talk about it. Because most of us as men, we're socialized a certain way. We may self-medicate with other things, some of which you just mentioned, but to get them to really acknowledge, hey, something is going on. And, you can be a man, you can be tough, but you still might need to get some help.
Right.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kandra.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
I was just going to say really quickly, I think sometimes I hear kind of this thing of like the roasting followed by the solution. So that seems
Mhm.
something where it's like, man, what's going on with your shoes? Something, something, something. But then normalizing that you've done something similar. If they've heard like, yeah, man, I was on that same bull too, but I had to turn around and talk to somebody because I don't know, my mental was gone, and you're not using the words that I'm using. You're using words from the community, or if you've read about something, just casually throwing it out there, a little bit more passive or things that I've seen work, or at least you can have that person open up a little bit more. Maybe they don't seek out and get help, but you can go, yeah, I was looking at this TikTok, or I was looking at this website and I saw that and was like, man, that sounds like me. I think I'm gonna go and kind of look at that. And they can go, yeah, I feel you. I was thinking that, and at least you can get more information.
Mhm.
Well, I would say that men have to be extremely close to each other to be able to do that. So if you're just casual, that generally doesn't happen. Generally, in a casual group setting, our philosophy is you need to just suck it up and get over it. Whatever it is you're dealing with, what you lost your job, you lose your woman, you're having some financial issues. Hey man, just pick yourself up and deal with it. Or we'll decide to go out and get some drinks together, or chase women together, or anything that you can do to disguise the issue and placate yourself, so you don't have to deal with the issue directly. That's generally how we deal with stuff. Not the best way of dealing with stuff. I'll be the first to say that.
Anything that
Oh,
you
look at the cutie.
anything that you would add to that, Kendra? And
Hey.
what would that look like for the sisters, young girls?
I think it's the same. I would agree with what he was just saying in regards. You have to be able to trust that person. It can't just be anybody telling you that, but you have to be you have to be honest with yourself in that too. In regards to, when something is wrong, and when you need a little bit of help. And so when you're being honest with yourself, then you can be honest with those around you. And so then that's what will help open those doors of those conversations. And then, like you said, just speak to each other how you would normally speak. Try not to be somebody you're not. Um, be who you are. And I think that's the most effective way to have these conversations and for them to actually stick.
Right.
And as we close out, because I know that mommy duty is calling, when we talk about young people, um, you know, parents, as much as we love our children, as much as we want to help them, sometimes they don't particularly think parents know anything. And so sometimes parents can, be effective, but sometimes you have to be a little bit creative in really finding out what's going on with your young person or the young person in your life, whether that is your child or someone else, maybe a family member, etc. So when we look at a lot of unfortunate incidences of major depression, which could lead to gun violence, which could lead to suicide, which could lead to homicide, an inordinate amount within our young people. What are the things that you can share with us to help address some of these issues within our young people? I mean, I know a lot of our parents, grandparents, oh, not my baby, not my baby. Yeah, your baby. And we found out a lot about this during COVID because, parents found out who their kids were, grandparents found out who their grandparents were, and some kids found out who their parents were. Tell us something about dealing with young people in particular. How do we work to manage and look for those symptoms with young people? Because they can be very good at masking a lot of things, making sure that things look very good when they may not be.
I think again with that one is you have to know your child, similar to what I said earlier. When you know your child, you know how their normal patterns, you know how they act, you know who they are even when you're not around them. And then when you start to see those changes or someone brings something up to you that doesn't necessarily seem that it would be something your child may do, question and dig deeper into it and don't let things slide. A lot of when I went to a mass shooting conference a few months ago, and they were interviewing a lot of the parents of some of the younger individuals that have committed these mass shootings, and a lot of the parents stated that they didn't know and they had no inclination of their child to even be capable of doing something like this. And then if you really sat down and start to break down their relationships with their child, they're not talking to their child. There
Right.
was no interactions, and so know your child, build that relationship with your child, have those conversations, and then you should help you when you come to these points, or keep yourself and your family from even getting to that state.
They always say to put on your mask first, right on the plane before you can put on someone else's.
Mhm.
So one of those things too as parents is to be present, just like I'll be slowly getting off of this so that I can be present with my kids. But a way for you to understand and even figure out, like Kandra is saying, to identify those signs, you have to be present too. And granted, I understand that even that is a privilege for some people. If
Mhm.
you're in a single parent household, my brother right now is a single parent. It's hard for him to be present there because he's thinking about bills and everything else. But it's still something, if you can find a way to first take care of yourself and identify those different ways for you to be present, for you to be happy, as you're also taking care of your kids. You can't take a break. But I think
Mhm.
that's something too that can really be able to identify the different signs of what's going on when you are present enough to know, hey, you're looking different versus looking up and being like, hey, we're all on our phones at night. Nobody sees
I'm
me.
not.
That's
I turn mine off.
you're
Hey,
the
Tom, we
exception,
have time for one more
Yeah,
question,
and actually
and we
we have
can
a
wrap it
couple
up.
of questions from Miss Malika online, and then we'll go ahead
Well,
and close the
pick
show out.
one, and then let's wrap it up.
Curious about the impact and the uptick of use of vaping on teens and mental health, and then what can you do proactively to help out teens avoid mental health issues?
Carla, do you have any knowledge on the vaping aspect?
Yeah, so there hasn't been too much directly when it comes to vaping and mental illness, although it is sad that we're taking a step back when it comes to when we're looking at tobacco usage. And that's why you can't ever let up and think that the things from learned from different generations, that they're actually things that have been helpful if we don't continue to talk about that. So while there is no link with vaping and mental illness in particular, it's the health concerns that come with that indirectly lead to mental illness. What I'm talking about is all of a sudden coughing, talking about how people feel differently, again, when it comes to energy levels, and how that, again, if you've got that jar where you already have a little bit of genetic factors that can increase your risk for certain mental illness, vaping and a health concern can add to that, but it isn't directly linked.
So, Carla, have we studied it long enough? I mean, do we know the long-term effects of these chemicals we're, in the vaping and the effect that it's having on us physically and mentally? Or this just hasn't been around long enough for us to know the long-term effect. And we're
It's
only looking at really short-term.
Yeah, it's looking more directly at the link between the nicotine and the artificial things that are there that have been around for a long time.
But
It's
there are
just
the tars and other chemicals, all kinds of stuff they put in these things now, and it can be good for your body. I mean, physically. I mean, I would think eventually, mentally, it's going to break you down also.
exactly.
And then what can we do to help our youth avoid proactively to help avoid mental health issues?
I would speak to in regards to the youth, but just anybody. I think there's four things that I think could help in aiding in the mental health of just the community. Is one, you have to listen to yourself and listen to others. You have to be honest with yourself, be honest with others, connect with the necessary entities, whether it's connecting your child to the school counselor, or talking with your medical provider and having them doing an assessment, or joining a peer support group, or joining a group for survivors of domestic violence, whatever it may be, make those connections. And then lastly, advocate. You have to advocate for yourself, and you have to advocate for your children, and advocating for others when you notice that there's a need that they have and it's not getting met, whether it's at school, your child's being bullied, or they're encountering something that could be affecting their mental health, and no teachers or nobody is stepping up and addressing that issue. You need to continue to advocate for your child and be that voice for them. And then advocating for yourself if you're experiencing anything that may be affecting your mental health. So I would say listen, be honest, connection, and advocacy.
And I would say that a diversity of different environments too. As a kid, if things weren't going good at school, I knew that I had church, or I knew that I had dance or some other friend group if I felt really isolated in one place. And when I'm talking to patients, when they're going through those acute settings where they are very, very sad, the first question we ask is, okay, before we get off the phone today, I do telemedicine. Who can you rely on? Who do you generally go to when you need support? We want to identify that before they go somewhere. And certainly that's something where if you're not feeling like one group can understand you, maybe another one can. And again, that's why I say as a parent, and even as yourself, really trying to, even again, people don't want to be outside nowadays. I get it. A lot of things online, but trying to go to different places, different organizations, different community things that are offered out there for free, your kickball, tournaments or groups or whatever like that, intramural. There are other things that you can do that don't cost anything to give you a sense of community. Community is big, and it's what we've been missing for years.
Okay.
All right. Excellent show, ladies. Thank you as always. Of course.
As always.
Thank you.
Any last words, or you guys have any last words before we close the show out?
My daughter being at that, but people being as happy as they can be and advocating for people living in their truth, as long as it doesn't directly impact me and my kids over here.
And television and a cell phone are not substitution for parenting. So,
yes, that too.
So like the lady said, get involved in and advocate for your children. Okay, with that being said, Tom, thank you very much. We're going to close out. And you guys have to come back. We're hopefully before the end of the year, and let's talk again. And Carla, I have some more cancer studies I want to talk to you about next time you're on the show.
And I got some other studies I want to talk to you about, JR.
Okay, well, look at that. We'll both be sharing information that's mutually beneficial. I'll talk to you later. Okay, we'll see everybody next week.
Thank you.